On today's episode, we talk about 5 very influential individuals in the fishing industry that were just inducted into the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame. We have 2 surprise names that are returning to the Bassmaster Elite Series in 2025, and we answer your fishing questions about when to reach for a finesse jig versus a standard jig, how to target larger bass, and even crappie fishing. All of that and more on this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
Welcome to the Tackle Talk podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. World-class fishing gear, unmatched personal service. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Tackle Talk podcast. A huge shout out to the folks that make this entire show possible, the fine folks over at American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. Headquartered in Evansville, Indiana, right here in the Midwest, they are your number one stop for brand new rods, brand new reels, line, baits, anything you could need, but also a huge selection of used fishing gear as well. If you're on a tight budget, like I know so many of us are, if you had your eye on a certain rod or a certain reel, be sure to check their used gear section often. They're always updating it with rods and reels from Shimano, Daiwa, G. Loomis, Dobbins, 13, Duckett, Abu Garcia, all of your favorite brands. Go check them out. But aside from that, they also plain and simple just have the best customer service that I've ever experienced from a fishing company. I know a lot of you have got to experience that as well. They actually care about you. They want to make things right. They want to get you the best gear at the best price as fast as possible with zero hiccups. That's what they're there for. Heaven forbid you do have a hiccup. American Legacy Fishing, I have seen them bend over backwards to make sure that they make people happy versus those other companies that just kind of say SOL. You don't get that with ALF. So be sure to head over to www.americanlegacyfishing.com. Check out everything they have to offer. And as always, you can use code TACKLETALK10. Tackle Talk 10 saves you 10% on almost everything on the website. Some exclusions apply, not many. Almost everything on that website. 10% off with code TACKLETALK10 over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com. Okay, folks, we are back today with a regular episode. I hope you all enjoyed last week's 5-year anniversary show. I know I teased it for like a week or two. I hope it lived up to the hype. Just getting to hear fall fishing tips from Bill Dance, Jimmy Houston, Jacob Wheeler, Mike Iaconelli, Denny Brower, Ott Defo, Boyd Duckett, a huge list of our past guests. We had something like 29 or 30 people on last week's episode. But if you can't find something interesting or learn something from that episode, I don't know what to tell you. We kind of emptied the clip on last week's episode, so hopefully you guys all enjoyed it. But today, we are going to start, folks, by recapping a little bit of bass fishing history that took place last week, specifically last Thursday, I believe it was. And it was at the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame, which inducted their 96th, 97th, 98th, 99th, and 100th inductees in the history of the Hall of Fame. Now, the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame, it's been around for something like 24 years. I think it started like right around 2001, and that inaugural class that went in back then was comprised of Ray Scott, Homer Circle, Bill Dance, Bobby Murray, Larry Nixon, Rick Clunn, Roland Martin, and Forrest Wood. And since then, some of the most influential anglers and lure makers and industry leaders, broadcasters, media members, and trailblazers in general have donned the Hall of Fame's signature blue jacket, including some familiar faces like Jimmy Houston, Hank Parker, Denny Brower, Kevin Van Dam, Mike Iaconelli, and so many more. And this year, 5 more legends were accepted into bass fishing history as Mark Zona, Alfred Williams, Skeet Reese, Mike McInnes, and Fred Arbogast were inducted Thursday night, September 26th in Springfield, Missouri. So today, I want to give each of these guys the recognition that they deserve from us here on Tackle Talk and tell you guys why each of these guys is important to us as bass anglers. Some of them you're probably familiar with, others maybe not so much. So today, we're going to start with our friend, past guest here on Tackle Talk, Skeet Reese. To me, I really think Skeet Reese probably had the most impressive tournament resume of any angler, past or present, that was not already in the Hall of Fame. So I think they made a great choice there. Over his career, which is still going, by the way, Skeet has racked up like 12 career wins through Bassmaster and the MLF circuits. He was the 2007 Bassmaster Angler of the Year. He won the 2009 Bassmaster Classic. But aside from all of those wins, he's finished in the top 10 84 times in his career, and he has 124 top 20s. On top of that, he's won well over $4 million in tournament winnings alone, but that doesn't even take into account the other side of Skeet Reese that was so influential to the sport of bass fishing, the business side. So Skeet, along with maybe Kevin Van Dam, was quite possibly one of the most influential marketers of fishing products for a long, long time. He's got an unmistakable personal brand with his signature black and yellow color scheme that we talked to him about when he was on the show. It can be found on his boat, his giant truck, his jersey, his rods. Anything Skeet Reese touches just seems to turn into black and yellow. But he also helped develop some of the best-selling baits of all time, including one we have a very soft spot for here on the Tackle Talk podcast, the Berkeley Pit Boss. So a very, very well-deserved induction into the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame for Skeet Reese. Moving on, the next inductee is going to be a guy whose voice might be as or more recognizable than anyone else in the past 20 or 30 years of fishing. It's definitely up there. It's Mark Zona. When I think of Mark Zona, I think of two things. I think of a guy whose personality is infectious and makes the fishing world just a better place, and a jack of all trades that's truly done a great job of navigating that fishing landscape and using those skills to produce some of the best fishing content over the past few decades. And when those things meet, you get a very special type of person. Zona just seems to be one of those people that everything he touches, he makes better. Because let's be honest here for a second. The fishing world is full of people who can catch him. And Z can catch him just like the rest of everybody else, but what sets Z apart is the personality you get with the fishing. You get belly laughs, you get quick, witty comebacks, you get hilarious analogies. A lot of people can go fishing and fill that time and catch fish, but it's what happens in between, like that fills in the cracks almost, that makes somebody truly special. And Zona has that ability to do that better than almost anyone else that I've ever had the pleasure of watching over the years. He's also worn a ton of hats as a staple on Bass Live over the years, announcing his retirement from the broadcasting desk at the end of last season, but he's also got Zona's Awesome Fishing Show, which I believe started out as something titled like World's Best Fishing Show or World's Greatest Fishing Show, and it was like the first probably 3 or 4 years of that, and then it morphed into Zona's Awesome Fishing Show, but that show in some iteration has been going on since like 2005, almost 20 years of fantastic fishing shows. He's also worked on probably 10 other fishing shows in his career. Bass Center, the Bass Pros, Kings of Bass, College Smashmouth Bass Championship, obviously Bass Live, and his own shows, but those have spanned across ESPN and Fox Sports 1, the Outdoor Channel, Fox. If there's a station on your TV set that shows anything remotely outdoors related, Zona has probably been on it a time or two. So the fishing media landscape would just look a whole lot different without Mark Zona, which is why he was fittingly inducted into the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame this past weekend, and that legacy will now be preserved forever. So congratulations to Mark Zona. And speaking of other people who without them, the fishing media landscape would look a whole lot different, that brings us to our third gentleman that was inducted into the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame this past week, Mr. Mike McInnes. Now, we're starting to get into some of these guys that some of you may know, some of you may not, but either way, you should. And Mike McInnes is the son of the late, great Jerry McInnes, who founded JM Associates, the production company that's responsible for bringing bass fishing programming and coverage to a national audience. So JM Associates, headquartered in Little Rock, Arkansas, the relationship between them and ESPN in those early days of Jerry's program, The Fishing Hole, really helped kind of pave the way for outdoor programming that we now know and love today. But his son, Mike, who currently runs JM Associates, took it to the next level by pioneering live broadcasts and live streaming for professional fishing tournaments, which was realized when they first streamed the 2015 Bassmaster Classic live on the internet. That then obviously led to what we all know now, which is Bass Live, where you've got a ton of remote cameras and drones and mic'd up anglers. We're mirroring their electronic screens now, and the entire production that we see every time we fire up Bassmaster.com to watch a live tournament, that's Mike's doing. And then that's obviously led to a lot of other tournament circuits kind of following suit in this day and age of live streaming everything. So Major League Fishing now live streams. You've got the NPFL. You have all of these tournament circuits that are now kind of using what Bassmaster sort of started there. So when you sit down and you watch any live fishing tournament, Mike McInnes's fingerprints are all over that blueprint. And they're also all over every other production that JM Associates does today. They obviously produce Bass Live, but they do so much more than that. They do Bassmasters The Cast that came out last year. They've done Zona's Awesome Fishing Show for years, the Redfish Cup Series, and so many other tournaments and programs that they produce. So a big tip of the hat to Mike McInnes from all of us that enjoy and sometimes probably take for granted, if we're being honest, all of the production and innovation that's gone into smoothly producing a live broadcast of a remote fishing tournament somewhere completely across the country. Okay, and that brings us to our next inductee in the 2024 Bass Fishing Hall of Fame class, and it's a gentleman that was a Mississippi Hammer, still is a Mississippi Hammer, he's still around, still alive, still fishing, but also meant a ton to the growth and progress of bass fishing in general. It's Alfred Williams. Now, Alfred Williams grew up in the South in a time where very real racial barriers and issues were going on down there, and Alfred really became one of those anglers who kind of knocked down a lot of those barriers for African Americans in bass fishing. From a very early age, Alfred said, fishing was a way to bring people together in a time of racial tension. There were groups of every race fishing down on the river. We always had a good time, but we weren't fishing for sport. We were fishing to put food on the table. And from there, Alfred grew into a full-blown bass fisherman, competing in a ton of tournaments down his way. He won something like 200 times on Ross Barnett Reservoir. I swore I read that. Something like 200 plus victories, just dominating locally down there. He even won a Bassmaster Classic qualifier event on that same lake. And then that year when he got to fish the Bassmaster Classic, which was actually up here at the Ohio River in 1983, he finished in the top 10. And that subsequently led to more and more opportunities and inspiration for African Americans to get into bass fishing. But that's not all he did. Not only was he the first African American to compete in the Bassmaster Classic and all of those other milestones, Alfred Williams is often cited as the guy that popularized the hollow body frog. Yes, the frog fishing that we all know and love today, Alfred Williams was a pioneer of that technique. And I believe he was the first person credited with ripping off the stock plastic legs that came on those frogs and adding skirt material, which is obviously the standard process in today's hollow body frogs. So a trailblazer for African American participants and the forefather of common hollow body frog fishing. A very worthy inductee into bass fishing's highest honor, the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame. So now that takes us to our fifth and final inductee. It's a posthumous induction for Fred Arbogast. And this one's cool to me because I'm an Ohio guy, because Fred Arbogast was from Ohio. Like a lot of those early lure innovators, a lot of them were from this Ohio area. And Ohio, I think anyway, became sort of a hub for fishing tackle innovation because of the rubber production that we were known for in this area at the time, especially around Akron. So Fred Arbogast invented a ton of cool lures, fish catching machines over the years, including the popular jitterbug, the hula popper, and more. But it was really his innovation and introduction of rubber skirts, because, you know, Akron, into the fishing world that might just be the most important thing that Fred Arbogast did. So now all of today's rubber skirted baits sort of date back to him. So your jigs, your spinner baits, your buzz baits, punch rigs, even frogs and their silicone skirt legs that Alfred was credited with popularizing started from Fred Arbogast. So a key figure in the tale of bass fishing history. I think we all owe a big thank you to Fred Arbogast for many of the lures that we obviously enjoy today. So there are your 5 2024 Bass Fishing Hall of Fame inductees. You've got Fred Arbogast, an iconic lure designer. You've got Alfred Williams, a trailblazer and forefather of frog fishing. You've got Mike McInnes, a legendary producer and innovator of live fishing broadcasts. You've got Mark Zona, one of the most recognizable voices and personalities in the sport of fishing. And then you have Skeet Reese, arguably the most accomplished living tournament angler that had not already been inducted into the Hall of Fame. So a huge congratulations to all 5 of them. A very cool, well-rounded class for the Hall of Fame this year that touches every corner of the sport. You have tournament success, you have media, you have progress, and you have innovation. Okay, that wraps up our Hall of Fame talk really fast. Now let's get to some very quick tournament news, and specifically 2 Bassmaster Classic winners are coming back to the Bassmaster Elite Series in 2025 by using their Legends exemptions. So 2 spots for Legends opened up this year, one with Rick Clunn stepping away, and the other one was after all of the requalifying process shook out, there was 1 Legends exemption left to use. So for 2024, we saw the return of Jordan Lee to the Bassmaster Elite Series in this way, where he promptly picked up right where he left off with a top 10 Angler of the Year finish, and next year, 2 more Bassmaster Classic winners are going to make their return as well. The first is Cliff Pace. Now, Cliff won the 2013 Bassmaster Classic at Grand Lake and has 2 other Bassmaster victories on his resume. He last fished the Bassmaster Elites in 2018 and qualified and competed in the 2019 Classic, where he got 25th. He fished a couple Opens in 2021 and then really jumped back in and fished a ton of Opens last year in 2024. So that's Cliff. And then the second angler that's going to use his Legends exemption next year is Randy Howell. So Randy is coming back to the Bassmaster Elite Series after fishing the Major League Fishing Bass Pro Tour for the past 6 seasons. Randy won the 2014 Bassmaster Classic at Lake Guntersville, and he's got like 3 other career wins to his record. So 2 familiar faces returning to the Elite Series next year, Cliff Pace and Randy Howell. All right, everybody, it has been a week or 2 here, obviously, with our special episode last week, so let's crack open the mailbag and answer some of your fishing questions powered by Dakota Lithium.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast Mailbag, powered by Dakota Lithium Batteries. Adventure awaits at dakotalithium.com.
All right, the first question here is from Randy, and he says, "Hey, Andrew, I live in Tucson, Arizona, and fish a small lake with bass and crappie as well as a few other species. I have always thought of crappie as a cold water fish. Anyway, I usually fish with small swim baits targeting bass, but many crappie will hit it, and I've caught quite a few. In the summer months, however, when it's 110 to 115 degrees, in parentheses, no joke, I never catch crappie. I just caught my first one since spring in late September when we had our first cool front of the season. Why do crappie bite when it cools down? They still have to eat in the summer, right? I don't believe this lake stocks crappie either. I loved the mega episode recently. Always look forward to Tuesdays. Tight lines, Randy." Hey man, thanks for writing in. I appreciate it. First off, 110 to 115 degrees sounds miserable, dude. We've been complaining here all year because it's been insanely hot in Ohio by our standards, which is like 2 straight months of high 90s, and that was terrible. I can't imagine 110 to 115 degrees for long periods of time. But to get to your question here, crappie. I am no crappie expert, so I'll say that right off the top, but you didn't mention any sort of boat or anything like that. So the only thing I can think of is maybe if you're fishing from shore, which it sounds like you might be, then that could make sense because maybe those schools of crappie are just moving more offshore in the summertime than in the spring and fall when they're more likely to be up shallow on those shallow brush piles and things like that. They definitely still bite in all seasons. To your point, yes, they have to eat in the summer. You can catch them 12 months a year. I mean, we catch them through the ice, so that lends some credence, obviously, to your cold water theory there, but just in general, we catch them in the middle of summer, we catch them through the ice and everything in between. But I can tell you, there are lakes around here, 2 in particular that I can think of, where I'll go out on my kayak and I'll purposefully fish deeper main lake points in the summertime, and I'll see schools of crappie on my electronics out sitting right on the drops of those points and those ledges, like right at the very tip edge of where that drop off is on that point. And then I'll go back in the spring and in the fall and they're gone. There will be like shad balls in their place now versus the big schools of crappie. But the crappie have moved somewhere else. They've probably moved to shallower water in the spring and the fall, I would assume, because guys are always smoking them those 2 seasons on any sort of shallow laydown that they can find. So that could be part of it right there. They could just be moving on you. And if you're on the shore, it can be harder to target those fish once they move a little offshore in those big schools. Now, there's also just the fact that all fish seem to bite better when that cool down starts, like around here, that September cool down happens like you're talking about, fishing just in general gets better. So it makes sense that crappie would start biting too in those times a year. That cold snap sets those fish off and it triggers them to feed, and that isn't just a bass phenomenon. There's a lot of fish that do that. So my guess would probably be a little bit of both. Those fish are going to bite better in the spring and the fall because most fish do, at least around here, but they could also just be moving around on you, especially if you're a bank angler. That can be tough. All right, everybody, we'll get back to the episode here in just a second, but first we are brought to you in part by Dakota Lithium Batteries. You guys know that when I'm out on the water, when I have anything that needs power at all, every single thing that I have out there is run by a Dakota Lithium battery. Blue bottom, red top, you know them from a mile away when you see them. They're durable, they're reliable, and they're just the best batteries that I've personally ever used out on the water. They put up with all of my abuse, all of my shenanigans. I've never had a problem with them. I love never having to worry about my batteries out there on the water. That's because Dakota Lithium batteries are twice the power of traditional batteries at half the weight. They charge up to 5 times faster. They last up to 4 times longer. They have 100% US-based customer support, and they come with a whopping 11-year warranty. All of that from the best in the business, Dakota Lithium, and you can grab your own Dakota Lithium batteries by heading over to www.dakotalithium.com and using code TACKLETALK5. Not only does that let them know that we sent you here at the Tackle Talk podcast, it also saves you 5% off your entire battery purchase. And with batteries, that adds up pretty quick. So head over to www.dakotalithium.com, use code TACKLETALK5, and never have to worry about your batteries again. Again, Dakota Lithium, the official lithium battery of Bassmaster. Okay, the next question is from Justin, and he says, "Hey Andrew, I'm a horticulture and aquaponics teacher at a junior high school in South Louisiana. This year, our aquaponics class is raising hybrid bluegills along with the channel catfish that we usually raise. Your episode on January 29th about bluegill has been one of the most helpful resources for preparing to teach my students about bluegill. I've listened to it more times than I can count. I wanted to thank you for the episode and see if it would be possible to get a transcript of the episode if it's available. If not, it's okay. I just wanted to start breaking things down from the episode like breeding behavior, life cycle, lateral lines, etc. Thank you again for your content." Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it. And first off, before I answer this question, where in the world was this class when I was in junior high school? We had like algebra, we had trigonometry, we had physics, we had, language arts, all that stuff. At my little podunk school in Central Ohio, we did not have an option for the raising hybrid bluegills class. That is so cool. I'm insanely jealous of those kids. That is one of those things I would have beat down the door to take a class like this in junior high. But to answer your question, unfortunately, I don't have any transcripts of the show just because I don't like word for word write out the show or save any of that or anything. However, I did notice about 2 or 3 weeks ago for the first time, it could have been going on way longer than that, but it's the first time that I actually saw it because I don't actually listen to our own episodes very often, if at all. But I noticed that Apple Podcasts has started transcribing all of the episodes. So if you open Apple Podcasts, just click on the app, then click on Tackle Talk and scroll down and just pick a random episode and click on it. It'll take you to that episode page. If you scroll down to where it says transcript, and then if you click, there's like a little right arrow right beside the word transcript, click that and boom, there's its best effort at transcribing that entire show. Now, it might not be perfect, it might mishear a word here or there, but it's pretty darn accurate. So from there, I would assume if you have an iPhone, you can just hold down, select all of the text from that entire transcript, copy and paste it into an email, and then send that to yourself. And then you should be able to copy and paste out of the email, put that into a Word document, and edit it. I think that should work. I really hope it does because it would be so cool to have that episode used in like actual school curriculum. Shan has a ton of good information for us in that episode, obviously, but there's also like 2 or 3 other older episodes where we have Shan on that would be probably good for that class too. We've done quite a few bluegill heavy episodes with Shan over the years. But yeah, man, if that doesn't work, let me know, email me, we'll figure something out, but I think that should give you what you're looking for. And I guess that probably goes for any of you listening too. If there's an episode that you want to download the text of or make a list of things to buy or whatever, you can just copy and paste the transcript straight from Apple Podcasts now. Okay, the next question is from James, and he says, "Hey Andrew, first of all, I just wanted to say congratulations on the 5-year anniversary. Your podcast, along with a good cup of coffee, has made many an early morning commute more enjoyable and has really helped me deepen my love for the sport." Secondly, I had a question concerning various ways to throw finesse worms. I wet weighed mostly Florida and Georgia lakes and rivers where I've developed a reliance on weightless Texas rigs, but I have heard many times on the podcast that you consider the Ned to be the ultimate finesse cheat code and often suggest the wacky rig and shaky head as well. Compared to a Texas rig, when would you throw these other three, and what in your opinion is the Texas rig not meant for? Love the show. Here's to another 5 years, James. Well, thanks, man. Appreciate it. That is an interesting question. So we're talking about, I guess, when to throw weightless Texas rigs versus wacky rigs versus shaky heads versus Ned rigs. Oh, man, I could do a whole episode on that, right? And I don't know, the more I think about it, maybe we will. I think I might have just found next week's topic because there's just too much there, right? I don't know if I can answer this question quickly in 2 to 3 minutes. My brain is just racing right now, and there's more and more things where I think I have a direction I want to go. There's more things that pop in. I think this is more of like a 15 to 30 minute conversation and answer here. So I don't know, man. I think you might have to stay tuned on this one. I think we might have to take more time for this, and this might become next week's episode. Yeah, okay, no more ifs. I'm going to do this next week. That's what we're going to talk about next week on the show. This is a great subject and a great question, and there is just a whole lot to unpack with this because those, even though they seem fairly similar techniques, there are situations where 100% I'm going to reach to one of those four versus the other three, and I don't want to shortchange you on this answer here and just try and condense it into like 2 minutes or something. So I know that is a lame mailbag answer, but I think that could be a really interesting thing to explore deeper and do a full episode on. And I might just have you covered. Pay attention next week or the week after. I think this is going to become one of our episodes. That's a good one. Okay, the next question here is from Nash, and he says, "Hi, I'm Nash from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I'm 11 years old. I love the podcast. I'm a very avid angler. I'm on the hunt for my first 5-pound bass, and I have been learning and using all of the tips from your show for catching big bass. I used all of the lures you recommended for fall fishing and even lost a couple. My goal is to get a 5-pounder by 2025. Do you have any tips?" Well, hey, Nash, thanks for writing in. Man, 11 years old and looking to break the 5-pound mark in what would realistically be the next couple months, right? You said by 2025. Well, the good news is this is the time of year to do it in Pennsylvania, right now, or I guess springtime. But I guess this question is really just how do you target bigger fish versus targeting numbers of fish? So I'm going to start out here by saying that there's a lot of truth to bigger baits catching bigger fish. Yes, you will still catch small fish with big baits. Yes, your numbers might go down. It might be more of a struggle, but the average size of bass that I've caught over my lifetime is definitely bigger with like a 5+ inch bait than like a 2 or 3 inch bait. So there's some truth to that. Now, not all the time, not all situations, but your average fish will probably get bigger if you upsize your bait. But it's a double-edged sword because we've talked about the past few weeks and you heard some of the biggest names in fishing tell you downsizing can actually be the move in the fall. So that brings us to the big question, what do you do? Well, if it were me and I was only trophy hunting, I'm only going out for the biggest fish in that body of water, and a 5+ pound fish in Pennsylvania is one of the bigger fish in your water probably, I would do two things. First, I'd get out there on low pressure, overcast days with a little bit of wind and use the conditions to my advantage. Because kind of like in the fall, when you go out and it's the best time of year to catch like a big 10-point deer slipping up during the rut, because biology is forcing that deer to disregard everything it's ever learned and known about safety and the smart thing to do to avoid danger. It's thinking about one thing and one thing only. The same thing can kind of happen to bass during that magical fall feed time, especially on those textbook, overcast, low pressure fall days where conditions are just perfect. It's like they just, see red and want to eat. So that smart 5 or 6 pound bass at your local pond or your local lake that usually knows better might slip up a little bit on those days. So 10 months out of the year, that's a smart fish. That's how it's lived to be, 8, 10, 12 years old to be a 5-pound fish in Pennsylvania. But then around the spawn and mid to late fall, that cautiousness can kind of go out the window. Now, the other thing I would do is match the top end size of the natural forage in your body of water. I'm not telling you to go out and throw some big 12-inch Roman-made mother or something like that around, but maybe it's in that 4, 5, or 6-inch range for your baits. So if you're throwing a spook, throw a little bigger spook. If you're throwing a whopper plopper, throw like the 120 size whopper plopper. Throw bigger swim baits, not just like the little 275s. Go to like a 375 or a 4-inch swim bait. Just go up a little bit. Your numbers might go down, but I think your quality of fish might go up on average. So those are my 2 recommendations. I hope that helps. Good luck. I want to see a picture of a 5-pound bass if you do catch one. All right, and the last question here is from Colton. And Colton says, "Hey Andrew, I love the podcast, and I have what I think is a pretty simple question. I just can't figure out the answer. So at times, a finesse jig will just get bit better than a full-size jig, right? That's why finesse jigs exist. What I'm wondering is there a time where a full-size jig will perform better than a finesse jig? And if not, why not just throw finesse jigs all the time? Keep up the good work. I'm looking forward to hearing this one on the next mailbag. Colton." Okay, man, I don't know the real answer, but I'm going to give you my answer, and I hope that this makes sense and works. So when I'm deciding between a finesse jig and a bigger, bulkier jig, I take into account a couple things. I would say I take into account water clarity. I take into account the target species. I take into account like my desired fall rate, and then what type of cover that I'm fishing. And that's pretty much it. That's really how I pick my jig. So for water clarity, I tend to go bulkier in dirty water for the simple fact that I want that jig to be an easier, bigger target for that fish to find in that murky water. It's pretty self-explanatory there. In clear water, then a finesse jig becomes more of a player to me. Target species is also important, and I think this one goes without saying as well. A largemouth has a larger mouth. A smallmouth has a smaller mouth. So even though I know that smallmouth can eat giant jigs, my instinct that tells me in the back of my brain when I go fishing is to downsize my jig size for smallmouth, and then I'm a little bit more bold with my jig size for largemouth. Now, another one is fall rate. This one's really important. So if I'm fishing in like 25 foot of water and I'm in the wind, then a little finesse jig is just not going to cut it for me sometimes, especially when I'm in a kayak and I need it to get down there fast as I try and hold my spot in that wind. I need that jig to get where I want it to go, way down there, and I need it to fall at a faster rate. So if I know where that offshore ledge is and that drop off that I specifically want to fish, but the wind is blowing 15 mile per hour and pushing me in that kayak, when I make that cast, I need that jig to fall down to that ledge in a few seconds. I don't have time to wait 20, 30 seconds for a little 3/16 ounce jig to get all the way down there, and then it's going to get blown, 20 foot off where I wanted it to go in the first place. I need that like half-ounce jig, or sometimes even heavier, to get down where I need to go. Now, if I had a boat with spot lock and I could just sit there with no effort, then yeah, maybe I could be more patient. But by necessity, I need more weight to get down there faster in certain conditions. Now, on the flip side, say I'm fishing 7-foot deep gravel flats or something, then yeah, that fall rate can and should be slower. I'll break out more of like a finesse jig. And then the last thing that I'm going to consider here is cover type. If I'm fishing giant rock points, I like football jigs. If I'm fishing boat docks, then I actually like more of like an arky style head for skipping. If I'm fishing laydowns, then I like a traditional bullet style flipping jig head. If I'm fishing open water and random stuff in creeks or, little small water situations, little ball heads work great. So the type of jig that I'm going to pick up is also determined by the type of cover that I'm fishing. Now, the weird part about finesse jigs is that it's a really ambiguous term. A lot of people call a lot of things finesse jigs. Anything can be a finesse jig if you put the name on the package, or you trim the skirt up a little bit, or you make it lighter, or something like that. It's not like, a football jig that you know it when you see it. It's not like a ball head jig, you know it when you see it. It's a lot more of a loose term that people use. So if you're just talking about finesse jigs in terms of like a slimmer skirt or something, you can do that anytime. I trim every single one of my skirts, big jigs, small jigs, finesse jigs, doesn't matter. Every skirt that I own that's not still in the box or the bag somewhere is trimmed on the skirt. And if we're talking about finesse jigs just in terms of weight, well, that's a tough one too, because obviously every jig type has, heavier and lighter options for that jig. So then it just becomes more of a fall rate than anything else. So there's a little bit of a distinction between finesse jigs, or just smaller, lighter, more compact jigs, and then their bigger counterparts. All right, everybody, that is today's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate you all. As always, go find us on the internet, tackletalkpodcast.com. Shoot us an email, tackletalkpodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Tackle Talk Podcast. Go over to our YouTube channel if you haven't watched last week's episode. That entire episode is up there with videos of all of the guests. It's really one that you don't want to miss. I took the time to actually edit the entire show, so from start to finish, it's about as professional as I can make a video edit look, so it actually looks pretty good for me not really knowing what I'm doing. But go check that out. It's on YouTube. It's just youtube.com/Tackle Talk Podcast. And as always, we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2021. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.